Hello friends, today we are going to discuss the Hindu editorial that is 16 November 2022, and this editorial titled A Call to Action to Avoid Climate Catastrophe. See, the climate action and editorial related to climate change, and this climate changes never goes out of the news. See, we can see since the 21st century is almost related to climate change. We are facing unprecedented climate changes. Like we can see that now flooding in Pakistan, or heat wave in Europe, or forest fire in Australia, or hurricanes in the United Nations, and many of the government take this agenda in the front. Like in the Germany recently, we have seen the new party formed in on that party named the Green Party, and that's totally focused on the climate. So this editorial is related to COP27. Like right now, it is happening in the Egypt, Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt 2022, and we have seen the COP26 in the United Kingdom. And these are COP, yani Conference of Parties. COP means Conference of Parties. This is related to UNFCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. UNFCC is basically a organization that comes from first Earth Summit, like 1992. The first Earth Summit, and this editorial is giving insight into what are the challenges in the our target to achieve the 1.5 degree Celsius pre-industrial temperature related to pre-industrial era is like after 1850s or 1860s. We consider all those era at the pre-industrial, like 19th century. So now we are discussing about this editorial, A Call to Action to Avoid Climate Catastrophe. This is saying that the climate change is global problem that require cooperation between all nations, and that is true. Since one nations cannot take this climate change forward, and we need lot of new technologies to uh, to cooperate with these new technologies, a lot of fundings. And since we are not like this is saying that why today more than 30 newspaper and media organizations, more than 20 countries have taken a common view about what need to be done. Time is running out. I'm reading this line by line. Just what is need to explain, I will explain these editorial in full detail, and I'm reading line to line. Just you can focus on the my words, and wherever it is important, I will explain any term or anything that is important related to prelims and mains. I will dictate you, or I will explain that in full detail. And since climate and this environment is very important from the prelims as well as men's perspective, in every year you will get the approx 15 to 20 questions in prelims related to environment and geography, and this is very important. And the questions are even deeper in the depth understanding of the current affair, not that depth understanding of the basic syllabus. You need the current affair, whatever is coming in the current, they will ask, definitely will ask in the prelims examination. And also from the man's perspective, you will get the questions on the climate, and in the essay you will get the help, in the ethics you will get the help from all these editorial. Like so we are continuing further. So it is saying that the time is running out. Rather than getting out of fossil fuel and into clean energy, many wealthy nations are reinvesting in oil and gases. See, this is the trend that we are facing right now. To arrest the climate temperature, to arrest the climate change within 1.5 degree, we need to switch to the cleaner energy. But in this what this editorial is saying that, and the many nations are reinvesting in oil and gases. Why they are reinvesting in oil and gases while they are talking about the cleaner energy and the climate change and all things? This editorial will explain you everything. Like this a fossil fuel gold rush. There is the ban on the Russian supply since Russia attack on Ukraine. So many nations are exploring oil and gas by themselves since the rate of oil and gases are increasing so high. So cleaner energy, many wealthy nations are reinvesting in oil and gas, failing to cut emissions fast enough and haggling over the aid they are prepared to send to poor countries. All this while the planet hurtles towards the point of no return, where climate chaos comes irreversible. Since the COP26 United Nations Climate Summit in Glasgow 12 months ago, countries have only promised to do 1/50th of what is needed to stay on track to keep temperature within 1.5 degree of pre-industrial level. See, like last COP26 was happened in the Glasgow, that is United Kingdom. So it is saying that since the 12 months down the time, like COP26 was 12 months ago, and countries have only promised to do 1/50th of what is needed to stay. See, 1/50th of what is needed to stay on the track of keep temperature within 1.5 degree of pre-industrial level. No consistent have avoided extreme weather disaster this year. See, what are the extreme desire and disaster this year? That is also given in the editorial. Pakistan, flood in Pakistan, heat waves in Europe, forest fire in Australia, hurricanes in United Nations, given that these came from elevated temperature of 1.1 degrees centigrade. See, current temperature is 1.1 degree centigrade. What we are targeting to arrest it, it is within 1.5 degree centigrade. Since in the 1.1 degree centigrade, we are facing so many catastrophic events around the world. See, flood, heat wave, forest fire, hurricanes, and even India is not out of all these things. India is also facing the so many, like heavy rains in Kerala and droughts in many parts of the northern part of India, or sometimes prolonged heat waves or prolonged rainy season or the summer season. So these are problem with the climate change. So this editorial is explaining that we are trying to arrest this temperature within 1.5 degree, but commitment is not in the right path. Commitment is not what we have committed, what we have needed to stay on the track, that we are not following our commitment. See, the many countries are reinvesting in oil and gases. Fossil fuel is the main reason behind all these climate changes. But many countries, even developed countries, are reinvesting in oil and gases. What are the reason behind this? This is saying that a fossil fuel is gold rush, like we are rushing it behind the, like in the oil and gas, like gold. It is so precious to reinvest in the oil and gases. Why it is so precious? Because the many nations seek to reduce their reliance on Russia, like European Union, mainly European Union, we can say that they want to avoid Russian oil and gases. While Russia have huge reserve of oil and gases, but Union wants to avoid all these since Russia has attacked on the Ukraine. So world is experiencing gold rush for new fossil fuel project. So developed countries are finding new fossil fuel project like oil and gases and all these to avoid the high rate of the oil and gases. These are cast as the temporary supply measure, but they risk locking the planet into irreversible damages. It is saying that these new investment in the fossil fuels in the oil and gases are temporary supply measures. But this, since the temporary supply measures can change the or can irreversible the damages a planet into irreversible damages, like what we have going to damage from these projects, from exploring oil and gases, we never reverse it. We cannot reverse it in with new technology or in any cost. So what we are doing is not the right thing. All this underlying that humanity has no end its addiction to fossil fuels. It is saying that even after we have so many scientific research, we have so many we can say proof of the climate change, and we are already at the 1.1 degree centigrade, and we are trying to arrest it in 1.5 degree, but we are still reinvesting in the oil and gases. What it shows that, it shows that the humanity has to end its addiction to fossil fuels. We have addicted with fossil fuels. We are investing in the oil and gases. We are talking about the clean energy, but we have not come over our addiction of the fossil fuels. So if renewable energy was the norm, there would be no climate emergency. It is saying that the renewable energy was the norm, like since earlier, since from the beginning, if we had talked about the renewable energy, we have not invested so much in the oil and gas and all these projects, then there would be no climate emergency. So this kind of emergency, we can avoid all these emergency. The world's poorest people will bear the brunt of the destruction by drought. So what is he saying that, say, we can see the developed countries. Imagine about the developed country like US, European Union, Japan, Australia, and even can China can be considered as a developed country. It is calling itself as a developing, but as per the its GDP and per capita income, we can say that it is the developed country. So these countries are responsible for most of the greenhouse gases, most of the greenhouse emissions. We can say 50% of all the greenhouse emissions so far. So far, all the greenhouse emissions are coming from the developed country, and there are few of the developed country. We can say around 10 countries are developed so far in the world. So 10 countries are like 10 countries had been polluted this planet about 50%, and rest of the 200 countries, we can say, is together is the 50%. So this implies that the world's poorest people will bear the brunt of the destruction by drought, melting ice sheet, and crop failure. And this is happening in the Africa. We can say in the Africa, in the island nations, and many flood, earthquake. We can see in the many climate. Many events are related to climate directly or indirectly. So it is saying that the shield these group from the loss of life and livelihood will require money. Developing countries say one influential report need 2 trillion annual to cut their greenhouse gas emission and cope with climate breakdown. See, developing countries have less resources. Developing countries has developing countries have less technologies and less per capita income and more poverty. So what they need is that technical support and financing. First, they need to increase their per capita income, increase their GDP. They need to lift their people from the poverty. So we can not do two things simultaneously, like fighting the climate change and investing in our own GDP, lifting our people from the poverty. So what we need is financing. Who can finance us? Developed countries need to finance the developing countries. So it is saying that we need the $2 trillion annually. Can you imagine? Indian GDP is $3 trillion. Indian GDP is currently $3 trillion, and this report saying that we need to invest $2 trillion annually. It is calling about annually to cut their greenhouse gas emission and cope with the climate breakdown. Now it is talking that the moral responsibility of rich countries, how rich countries have destructed all these things, like greenhouse emission of the greenhouse gas is highest in the highest by the developed countries. And now we are talking about the historical emissions, like recently we have seen in the COP27 by India have taken the issue of the historical polluters. What is historical polluter? Historical polluter is like those who have polluted the most. We will not consider the current scenario of the pollution. Currently, I think USA and China are the highest polluter or highest emitter of the greenhouse gases. China is currently 31% is emitting the greenhouse gases, and India is 10% something. So what all these things, what all these conference of parties and now climate changes debate are talking about the current scenario, but we are talking about the historical polluters. Who is historical polluter? They have already polluted during the industrialization in 1850s, 90s, 1950s, all those times. They have polluted this environment. They have emitted so many greenhouse gases that today we are facing all these problems. Even we are today at the 1.5 degrees Celsius, that more than the industrial pre-industrial level. What the temperature at that time of the pre-industrial, we have 1.5 degree more than that today in today's scenario. So rich countries account for just 1 in 8 people. You can say 1 in 8, yani, it means around 13% of the population in the world today, but they are responsible half of the greenhouse gases, that is 50%. These nations have a clear moral responsibility to help. Developing nations should be given enough cash to address the dangerous conditions they did little to create, especially as a global recession looms. So, what is the new worry about this? What is this editorial is talking about? This is talking about that the first thing, we need $2 trillion annually to cut this their greenhouse gas emission. Who need? Developing countries. Second thing, we currently the climate, the temperature currently temperature 1.1 degrees centigrade of the pre-industrial level. What we are targeting? We are targeting is 1.5 degrees centigrade till the end of this century. Okay. But what are the new challenges? New challenges is we are asking for financing from the developed country, and even developed countries promised to finance $100 billion a year. This financing is promised long before, in I think in 2000 or something, that long before they have promised for, or 2010, we can say 2010, they have agreed to finance $100 billion a year to the developing countries to cut their emissions, to improve their technologies or something, to give them new technologies, to switch them to the clear energy. But what is the new challenges that we are today facing? New challenges is developed countries are reinvesting in the oil and gases. Why they are reinvesting? Because we have sort of oil and gases prices are going up of the oil and gases, since the European Union and US have sanction on the Russia, and Russia is the major supplier of the oil and gas in the world, or we can say lot of yeah, major supplier of the oil and gas, one of the major supplier of oil and gas. So this sanction have increased the rate of oil and gases. So developed countries are reinvesting in oil and gases. First challenge is this reinvestment may create a new challenges for this climate change. Second thing, recession is looming. Recession, we can say, after the corona, everywhere in the global, we don't have much GDP data of the that we can celebrate. Even in the US is facing so much inflation. India was facing inflation, and China was facing inflation, and they do not have any significant growth, since supply chain has been disrupted by the COVID-19, and so many things are happened in the past. So global recessions are looming. So what global recessions will how global recession will impact this? Global recession will cut the financing, like developed countries promised of 100 billion a year from 2020, but they are not delivering their promises. Why? Already there are recession, though they will more interested in their economy, in their domestic issues. They will invest more in their domestic issues and will not provide to the developing countries for climate change, since climate change are their secondary thing for them. So rich nations should deliver on the promises of previously committed funds, such as $100 billion a year from 2020. It is promised long before, like I think in 2010 it is promised that from 2020 the developed countries will provide 100 billion a year to the developing nations. So to signal their seriousness, it is providing their seriousness as a bare minimum, a windfall tax on the combined profit of the largest oil and gas companies, estimated at almost 100 billion in the first 3 months of the year, need to be enacted. See, this is second thing. What it is highlighting is that as a bare minimum, a windfall tax on the combined profit of largest oil and gas companies, estimated at almost $100 billion in the first 3 months of the year, need to be enacted. The United Nations was right to call for the cash to be used to support the most vulnerable, but such a levy would only be the start. Many nations are gaining the tax on the oil and gas companies. So in the first 3 months of this year, $100 billion taxes was earned by the countries from from these companies. So the United Nations was right to call for the cash to be used to support the most vulnerable section of the society, but such a levy would only be the start. Poor nations also carry debt that make it impossible to recover after climate-related disaster or protection themselves from the future ones. Creditors should be generous in writing off loans for those on the front line of the climate emergency. These are some suggestions suggesting this editorial. This news is suggesting what should be done and what should not be done. So this is saying that the poor nations should be given the priority, and the cash for to use be support in the support of vulnerable section of the society. And what are the loan or credit or debt is taken by the poor nations, and which is now impossible to pay or to recover after climate related disaster. One say that the Pakistan has taken so many loan from any institution or something, and it is the disaster year for the Pakistan. Lot of floods are going in the Pakistan. So it is saying that the creditor should be generous in writing of loans. Writing of loans means you can write off some of the interest or some part of the loans, and this should be considered. It is suggestions from this editorial. These measures need not wait for coordinated international actions. Coordinated international actions, countries could implement them on regional or national levels. A nation's cumulative emission must be the basis of its responsibility to action. While private finance can help, the onus is on big historical emitter to stump up the money. It is saying that we must consider first cumulative emissions. What is the nation's cumulative emissions? That what nation is emitting right now as their per capita emission, or as per their population, and according to that emission we must other them to the responsibility. We must give them the responsibility that if, like, India is right now, India is emitting 10% of the all greenhouse gases, and China is emitting 31%. So China's cumulative emission is 31% of the total greenhouse gases, and India's cumulative emission is 10%. So we must give the responsibility according to their emissions. We should not give that the all nations should donate according to equally. Yeah, donate equally or give the cash money or to the poorest countries or the developing countries equally. No. Who is polluting most, whose cumulative emissions is more, who has historically emitted the more. So all these are suggested in this. It is showing that the solving the crisis is the moonshot of our time. How is the moonshot? Getting to the moon succeeded within a decade because huge resources were devoted to it. So this is the line we can write in the men's examination. The solving the crisis is the moonshot of our times, which means to reach the moon we have devoted so many resources, so many technologies, and so many things to get to succeed to reach the moon. And we have reached the moon within a decade. Within the 10 year, within a decade, we have reached the moon. Why? How we have devoted so many resources and technologies and to and research and development to reach the moon. So climate, this crisis is also like, should have been like a moonshot. We need to devote our resources and our technologies, and we need to be serious so that we can reverse it, or we can reverse it in within the decade, or left alone the decay in the next centuries, or in this centuries, at the end of this centuries. So solving the crisis is the moonshot of our time. Say getting to the moon succeeded within a decade because huge resources were devoted to it. A similar commitment is needed now. So it is saying that we need to similar commitment as we have committed to reach the moon. So, but what are the challenges? The economic crisis has reduced the rich countries' appetite for spending, and the planet risk being trapped in fossil fuel dependency by a rearguard actions of big businesses. It is saying that this economic crisis after the coronas, this economic crisis have reduced the rich countries' appetite for spending, and the planet risk being they are not spending in the climate change, and they are not spending in the cleaner energies, or to reverse this climate change. Since they are trapped in the fossil fuel dependency, they are, even we are still in the even world are so much dependent on the fossil fuel. We are right now, we are only talking about the cleaner energy, but there are so many things to be done to reach our targets. During the pandemic, central banks across the world lubricated states' expenditure by buying up their own government's bonds. The trillions of dollars needed to deal with the ecological emergency demands such radical thinking return. It is saying that during the pandemic, central bank across the world lubricated states' expenditure by buying up their own government's bond. So we can say, even in the India during the pandemic, government issued the bond to the RBI, and RBI has given the money to central government, and central government invested all those monies to the welfare schemes, like Garib Kalyan Yojana, in that rice and wheats are given free of the cost. Vaccine was given the free of the cost, and so many things. New set of new hospitals, and in the new health infrastructure. So many dedicated project was taken up during the Corona time, or during these economic crisis. So all those monies were absorbed by their respective government, and the trillions of dollar needed to deal with the ecological emergency demand and radical thinking returns. So it is saying that act now. Act now. This is no time for apathy or complacency. The urgency of the movement is upon us. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change must be about the power of argument, not the argument of powers. This is the again the best line you can use in the men's examination. This is Conference of Party 27. COP27 is related to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that I have told you in the beginning. These are conference of parties are held by the UNFCCC, and it is saying that the power of argument and not the argument of power. Change must be about the power of argument, and not the argument of powers. Like powerful countries are argumenting over there how to be how to change the climate change and all these things, but there is no power of arguments. So these are the key line we can use anywhere in the written examination. Key to maintaining the consensus in Egypt is not to let dispute over trade and war in Ukraine blocks the global climate diplomacy. The United Nations process may not be perfect, but it has provided nations with a target to save the planet, which must be pursued at COP27 to save off an existential risk to humanity. So this is again discussing that we need to act now. We that this United Nations have shown us the path. We may not reach that, but we must try it. These are the Ukraine wars, and all these things should not block the climate diplomacy, global climate diplomacy, and we must continue on all these path to resolve this climate catastrophe. Thank you.